Well, yes, sir. My name's Kent Hovind. I just turned 67 yesterday, well, 2 days
God
ago.
bless.
That is the oldest I've ever been. Kind of a steady race to the grave. I've been an ordained Baptist preacher for 45 years, been a Christian for 51 years, and I taught high school science and math for 15 years. And about 30 years ago, began a ministry called Creation Science Evangelism. I defend the position that the Bible is literally true, scientifically accurate. It's correct, just like it's written. God made everything, that would mean everything, in 6 days, including dinosaurs. They always lived with man. And we defend the position the Bible is true, and the evolution theory is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the history of the world.
So this isn't going to be a debate where I sit here and just try and defend evolution against somebody that thinks evolution is ridiculous. What we're going to do in this debate, what I'm going to make sure we're going to do is look at both sides of the argument, and we're going to see which side of the argument is more scientifically sound. How does creation against science stand up when compared to evolution? So we're going to start with some claims that Dr. Hovind has made over and over and over again, and Mr. Dr. Hovind, if you think I'm misquoting you at any point, just butt in and tell me, okay?
Okay.
Right. So I've heard Dr. Hovind say many, many times that the Earth is about 6,000 years old, and about 4,000 years ago, there was a big flood, which essentially wiped out all the creatures on the planet, apart from those that were saved on Noah's Ark. And those individual animals were the first of a kind, which then speciated to get all the different species we've got now. So let's look at the science of the flood. I've also heard Dr. Hovind say that that this flood, obviously it was a very quick flood, it drained very, very quickly, and as it drained quickly, that's where we got the layers of strata, and that's where all the fossils were deposited. Let's look at that claim to start with. We have the flood, we have the strata forming, these layers forming during the flood. We have this fast-flowing water with sediment coming out of suspension. Now, let's have a look at what we see when things come out of suspension in the real world. You can see by the picture I've got in front of you there, when that happens in the real world every single day in our observable, the world around us, we see density layers form. Now, let's have a look at what we see when things come out of suspension in the real world. You can see by the picture I've got in front of you there, when that happens in the real world every single day in our observable, the world around us, we see density layers form. We see the most dense sediment sink into the bottom to be covered by layers and layers that are subsequently less dense as you go higher. But when we look at the rocks around us, that is not what we see. We don't look at the Grand Canyon and see a decrease in density. When we look all over the world, we see layers of rock that are mixed in density. This very, very fundamental thing flies in the face of what Dr. Hovind is saying. Nowhere in science do we ever see this sort of process, sedimentation, that gives us a mixture of layers. So what I'll be challenging Dr. Hovind on later on is, can he actually explain using science why, when we look at the strata in the real world, are they not in order of decrease in density from bottom to top? If we look at the fossils as well, it seems that the floodwater hasn't had, or the density of the fossils hasn't had any effect either. We don't see the biggest, heaviest, most dense fossils at the bottom. We don't see the lightest ones at the top. We see anything but that. It's almost as if the density of the sediment and the density of the fossils have absolutely no link whatsoever in terms of where they fall. But again, that's not what we see in science in the real world. So again, I'm going to be asking Dr. Hovind afterwards, can he actually scientifically justify and give me examples of where I can see things not conforming to what we know are the laws of physics? When we use radioactive dating, and I know Dr. Hovind is going to challenge me on this later on, and I really, really hope he does, because I'm looking forward to that conversation. But radioactive dating as well, you go down through those layers, radioactive dating shows an Earth that is far, far older than 6,000 years. It shows fossils that are far, far older than 6,000 years old. When we look at dinosaurs or humans, we also never, ever find fossils out of place. We never find a human fossil next to a dinosaur fossil. It's like the water itself has got a mind of our own. And this leaves me with 2 points. If we're going to start the assumption off, because I'm not going to argue with you on religion, so I'm just going to say from the word off, my personal beliefs have got nothing to do with it. Let's say God exists, okay? And then this isn't an argument against an atheist. Let's just say God exists. Why would God trick us? Why would God create a whole different set of laws of physics for the deposition after the flood or during the flood that we've never seen since? Why would he create such different laws to trick us into thinking the flood didn't happen? Now, there's well over 300 rabbits, well over 300 rabbit species on the planet. If we go back 4,000 to 5,000 years with the number of rabbit species we've got now, since that first rabbit kind stepped off the ark, we've got to have a new species of rabbit every 12 and a half years. If he was going to include hare in the rabbit kind, then suddenly we need a new species every 8 years. Now, I have absolutely no idea of any animal the size of a rabbit that creates a new species every 8 years. And I will be challenging you and holding your feet to the fire if you can't give me an example of speciation that happens that quickly, because these are the real numbers. This is the real maths. And unless you can provide some sort of evidence as to why you think this can happen, then your argument has already failed before you've even spoken. ERVs, endogenous retroviral DNA, is such a strong piece of evidence for evolution, and it backs up the fossil record, certainly for human evolution. And we share 7 of them with our closest ancestor, the chimp. I would again love your interpretation of how that could come about by coincidence if it wasn't evolution. We're not going to dance around that. We're here to talk about evolution. We're here to talk about animals. We're not here to talk about the evolution of the universe or the Big Bang or anything like that. And I'd like to keep the debate purely on evolution of animals.
We never see any animal change to a different kind of animal. Never. No farmer in the history of the world has ever seen any plant or animal produce other than its kind, which is why the atheists and evolutionists always go to the fossil record. I say, first of all, there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are bones in the dirt, lots of them. We have a bunch here in our museum. I got petrified clams right here beside me. There's no question there are lots of fossils, but it's not a record. They don't have a date stamped on them, and they don't talk. But all over the world, gravel is rounded off. And I'd like to answer some of your questions about why would the layers be sorted the way they are and the animals in this order. We see layers of strata and rock all over the world. I have a bunch of them right here sitting under my feet. So first of all, the creatures are not sorted in the order they put in the textbooks. I taught earth science also for 15 years. And the sorting, any sorting there is, would just as easily be explained by a flood. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, connecting all these layers. Now, I know, Al, you're very intent on the idea that the layers are different ages and represent different eons. That is simply not true. When you get petrified trees standing up, connecting all the layers, I think it's more common sense to say these layers formed very rapidly because the petrified tree would fall over before it could rot. During the flood in the days of Noah, the moon would pull the tide up like it always does and hold it like a bump of water while we spin around. It would be a tidal change every 6 hours, high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide, except the moon is also moving, so it ends up 6 hours, 12 and a half minutes between high tide and low tide. Who cares? Well, if the moon is holding this bump of water up while we spin around under it, during the flood in the days of Noah, there would be nothing to interrupt this tide. If the earth were smoother, there's enough water right now on the earth, right now in the oceans, to cover the earth 8,000 feet deep, 1.5 miles. So if the earth were completely covered in water, like the Bible says it was, the tide would become harmonic. We have 21,264 miles around the earth at this latitude to spin around in 24 hours, which means at Lenox, Alabama, we're going about 886 miles an hour. Equator's going 1,037, the North Pole's going 0. So I did a study of about 20 different people and said, how long is your cubit? What's your hand breadth? And do the math. If you take, if they're measuring 30 cubits around the inside, which would be the number you would need to calculate the volume of the bowl, the thickness of the brass would not matter to calculate the volume. It could be a mile thick. And the outside would be the distance you would need to go through a doorway to carry this thing through a door. If you take 10 cubits and subtract 2 hand breadths and divide backwards, you get 3.14159. So it is not a contradiction at all. Rapid species development. You're using linear progression rather than geometric progression. If 2 rabbits get off the ark and they have babies, and some of them move up where it's cold and some move where it's warm, those with the thicker fur can survive the cold climate better. Nature will select certain ones to survive in a certain environment. Nature doesn't create a thing, it selects. The thick-furred rabbits would survive better in cold climates, and the thin-furred rabbits would survive better in hot climates. But it didn't create the fur. It just selected something already in the gene code, which was some have thicker fur than others. Some people have more hair than others. So Then you have 2 different breeding populations. So in the next generation, you could get a total of 4 possibilities. The next generation would be 8. The next generation would be 16. The math on all of yours is assuming they all had to come in a straight line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And actually it's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. So you're greatly wrong in your mathematics about the speciation number. But I want you to keep in mind, Al, this little minor problem you may have thought you pointed out about getting all these varieties of dogs or rabbits or chickens in just 4,400 years. For heaven's sake, Al, you believe all these animals came from a rock. You guys do believe life had to start from the soup, the prebiotic soup, which came from the rocks. So you're straining at a gnat and swallowing an elephant, son. It's not happening. Evolution only takes place in the imagination. Evolution is pure SpongeBob religion. That's all it is.
In SpongeBob imagination, fairy tale science.
Nobody's ever seen any animal or plant produce a different kind. Never. The Bible says in the last days, the scoffers, and I would put you in that category, are willingly ignorant, and I would put you in that category too, of the creation, how God made the world, and they're ignorant of the flood. God created the animals to produce a wide variety of offspring. It's amazing the varieties you can get in the variations that happen within the same kind. There are now 8 varieties of bears in the world, and they might have had a common ancestor called a bear. That does not prove bears are related to mosquitoes and whales and cactus.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
But I take the position that all observation of all of human history says whales produce whales, cows produce cows, cactus produce cactus, no exceptions.
90
you get
seconds.
Varieties within the kind, but that's all you get is a variation of the same kind.
I asked you very, very specifically at the beginning if you could explain to me, give me examples of any kind of animal that has the rate of speciation that it's got. And you massively dodged that question. You talked about geography. And if we want to talk about geography, we'll talk about how the flood managed to deposit all the kangaroos in Australia, should we? Yeah, and throw the polar bears to one pole on the earth. Like, you completely failed in any way, shape, or form to explain or give any examples of that rate of speciation. It was a massive dodge, as was your response to why we get these layers of rock of different densities. You talked about a child's toy that you flick over. You've not provided anything of any scientific basis there. And what I'm after is an honest debate where you can give me some scientific explanation. This is a book from the 1900s that details exactly how these polystrata fossils are made. John William Dawson, look it up. The science behind this has been known for a long period of time. Most of them are formed in swamp-like areas and rapid deposits of sediment in swamp-like areas. When you were talking about the tides, you basically just said, what if some water sloshed around on the earth and maybe dropped some sediment? I'm not giving that any time. It was a load of nonsense. The circle, you talk about the circle not being able to calculate pi correctly. You told me there was no contradiction in the Bible with that. So what I'm going to take from that is that the Bible gives very unclear instructions. There was nowhere in that verse where the Bible said you're using the thickness of your hand to do that. There was nothing in that verse. It was essentially an extremely unclear instruction. And maybe that's a byproduct of nobody having the original Bible. Nobody's got it. Nobody's got the second version, the third version. What we are reading and have been reading for centuries is, the 100th, 200th, 300th, 400th, 5,000th translation and version of that book that has been cobbled together. And by your very definition that you have given us tonight, they can no longer be the same kind because they can't bring forth, they can't breed. Ring species are very, very clear examples. Here we've got A will breed with B, B will breed with C, C will breed with D, but D and A have got absolutely no chance of breeding with each other because they are not the same kind. This is a prediction of evolution. It is not a prediction of creationism. I'll tell you what is a prediction of our current scientific model. The layers and the fossils in the place that we find them and see them now. That is not a prediction of creationism. You've had to ad hoc an argument about chucking water and hoping the sediment falls in the right way. You didn't touch the ERV. You completely left the genetics alone. You wouldn't go anywhere near it. So I just want a question. I'm hoping you can give me a yes or no answer. Do you believe that parental testing parental genetic testing works? Yes or no?
Oh, yes, yes. I think it works most of the time. Yes, sir.
Because as we come further and further towards the present, and mutations affect those long-term repeats, they become more and more dissimilar, or more similar as we go in the past. This was massively strong evidence. You didn't touch it. You didn't want to touch it. You've completely dodged it.
How did the kangaroos get to Australia? After the flood, the ark landed in the country of Turkey today, and the animals began to spread out. Kangaroos are less aggressive than tigers, so they would probably be driven to the migration, to the fringe of the migration wave. And animals since the flood are not leaving fossils behind. Animals die today by the millions, and they don't turn to fossils. Florida would be ginormous. You could probably walk over to Cuba and the Bahama Islands, or Bahamas, just by lowering the ocean. So I believe the kangaroos probably migrated, happened to go that direction, ended up trapped in Australia, protected. You're saying there's a problem with getting all these varieties of rabbits from 2 rabbits. Son, you believe all the rabbits came from a rock. You do. That's what the textbooks teach. I show this over and over. It rained on the rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. And somehow in that first single-celled life form, it learned to be multicellular and turned to rabbits and whales and mosquitoes. As animals diversify, like the warblers you mentioned, they went around a lake or plateau, and now they can no longer interbreed. Are they still a warbler? Are they still a bird? Is that enough evidence for you, the fact that we have 2 varieties of warbler that do not normally interbreed? Maybe they could be forced to interbreed, I don't know, but they don't normally interbreed with each other. And you think that's enough evidence to believe warblers are related to cactus and mosquito? Clams are generally found at the bottom of the so-called geologic column. There is no geologic column, by the way. There's a bunch of layers of rock, which all formed during Noah's flood. You guys would love to say, well, the top layer is younger than the bottom layer. I say, really? Where'd the top layer come from? Outer space?
I know you mentioned that the rate of decay can sometimes change, but you know as well as I know that decay rates only change under spectacular conditions, like you might find in a star or something like that. Okay, spectacular conditions. So can you just tell me the flaw that's in this?
Are you going to give me equal time to do all that?
Absolutely.
When you find a fossil in the dirt, in the so-called geologic column, you can measure the amount of potassium or argon or carbon-14 or anything you want, but that's all you can determine. The rate it's currently decaying at and how much is currently in it. It's in a court of law, none of those dates would hold up. In an honest court of law, none of them would hold up. Let me get the potassium argon 449 here, 449. Radioactive dating failure. There's thousands of examples where it has absolutely failed, where they get the wrong dates. Potassium decays to argon in 1.3 billion years. Planetary Sciences Abstract, 48th annual meeting, back whatever the date on that was, as much as 80% of the potassium in a small sample of iron meteorite can be removed by distilled water in 4.5 hours. So you put the meteorite in distilled water in 4.5 hours, half the potassium is gone. Well, that's going to greatly throw off your date. So when you consider potassium argon dating, a rock of known age doesn't work. It doesn't work when you know the age. If you take a rock of unknown age, it is assumed to work. This is hocus pocus, SpongeBob fairy tale, imagination stuff.
Okay, right. Well, I'm going to stick with that one because I can't begin to tell you how disappointed I am with your answer with that. So I'm going to address the question again because I'm not going to let you dodge it and get around it because you didn't answer the question. The question was very specific. Jerry, can we get that graph back on the screen again, please, if that's okay, sir? The question was very specific. I asked you if you understood the significance of those 3 minerals plotting a straight line on the graph. You said you did, and then you started to talk about anything but isochron dating. Now, let's just address the radioactive dating that give false readings that you suggested. There's an error of about 3 million years with potassium argon dating. So if something is aged at 750,000 years old and really it's only a couple of 100 years old, etc., that's within the error. And we don't use potassium argon dating for things that are that young because of that reason. We don't take those readings seriously. So you can use them, but they are within the error. It's down to something called ion drift. And I'll be honest, I don't fully understand ion drift. But this I do understand. And I'm going to highlight this again because you told me you understood the significance. And then you showed everybody watching that you totally had no idea what the significance of this was. And we do not use isochron dating. We do not take the results seriously. We don't go any further if they do not produce a straight line. Do you understand the significance of the line being straight? Because I think that's the problem, because you started talking about carbon dating before when I asked you that, and you dodged this question. And we're going to have an honest debate, and I'll answer any question you want. I won't dodge it, but can we make this a standing point that you are either going to be honest and say you don't know, or you're going to explain to me the significance of it? And I'll do that to any question you want to ask me as well. I'll be honest and say, I don't know, or I'll explain it to you. But please don't dodge the question like you've been doing for a lot of the night, to be honest. Please stick to this point and explain to me that you understand the significance of this being a straight line and why, if it is a straight line, we cannot take it seriously.
I do not understand how that can possibly be used to demonstrate something that's billions of years old. What do these lines on this paper represent? Is this a percentage of the ratio of potassium to argon? Is it a time scale factor? What is the decay rate of potassium to argon? Again, how do you know it's been a closed system for 1.3 billion years? How could you possibly know that? Which is
So
what my point is. You can answer the question. You cannot tell it's never been contaminated. You cannot tell it's it's a closed system.
Yeah, we can, and that's because we understand the significance of ratios. Now, if you're saying you don't understand this, you don't understand what this means, that's fine. We can talk about this another time, but just be honest and say you don't understand isochron dating if you've never done it before. Because I'm not expecting you to be an expert on everything. If you've never done isochron dating before, just tell me you've never done it and you don't know it, and we'll move on. That's not a problem. But if you're saying that it's false, if you're saying that it's false and it's flawed, I'm going to push you, and I'm going to push you, I'm going to push you on it to explain why. So it's your call. You can either tell me you don't understand it, or we can go further.
Yeah, I do not see the significance of this at all. I showed you clearly from samples that are taken from freshly formed rock, which you said it works on. I agree, it resets the clock, but you said there's still some argon in it. I showed you lava flows from in the last 2,000 years were dated grossly wrong using potassium argon dating. What happened to your system? I showed you lava flows from in the last 2,000 years were dated grossly wrong using potassium argon dating. What happened to your system? Why didn't it work on the basalt from Mount Etna or the basalt from Hawaii, the Hawaiian volcanoes? Why didn't it work? Why would it give 8.5 million years on lava that is 60 years old? It doesn't work. I don't care about all the theories and the straight lines you draw on the graph. It doesn't work in reality. You're dreaming.
That not every rock. So maybe I should have explained it this way. Not every rock is a closed system. So we know that the ones that are not a closed system, we can't trust to give an accurate date. So when you're talking about all these other rocks that have give really inaccurate dates, they have not been closed systems. They haven't been. And if you don't test to see if the system is closed first, you are going to get an inaccurate result, which is where your results have come from. Isochron dating proves it's a closed system. But if you're going to continue to tell me it's wrong, I'm going to continue to ask you for an explanation of why it's wrong. And that explanation can't be potassium might leak out or argon might leak out, because you have to tell me why this is not proof of a closed system. So can you tell me, why this is not proof of a closed system, or not?
I thought this debate was supposed to be on evolution, and you haven't given any evidence of how an animal can evolve to a different kind of animal. Isochron dating has nothing to do with it.
Time out.
That doesn't possibility.
Time out, Ken.
I'm
sorry. I'm sorry. I have to redirect your statement there of Catz not providing anything for evolution. Did we miss the part about the genetic argument that was in his presentation?
We look at the genetics and how things like transposons, things like pseudogenes, things like ubiquitous genes, things like ERV, how they all map from the from the fossils right at the very top. As we dig deeper and deeper and deeper down that tree that we put together, we know that the genetics holds it together perfectly. All right. So we know that genetic analysis is really important, but you wouldn't address the genetics. You just skipped over that and you wouldn't talk about it, which is why I went on to other stuff. So if you want my best evidence, we've got the fossil record backed up by fantastic genetic analysis. But I haven't heard any evidence for creation at all. I've heard some, maybe the water might slosh around arguments. Maybe the tigers chase the kangaroos. I've heard that. Maybe the kangaroos are scared of tigers.
Well, I would certainly point out that if there are genetic similarities between different creatures, that is an example of a common designer. I think all the Microsoft Word programs, I bet Microsoft PowerPoint has thousands of identical lines of code to Microsoft Word because the same guys are writing the code. I bet if I go to Microsoft PowerPoint and click spell check on a word, it takes me to the exact same dictionary as if I'm typing in Microsoft Word. That's not evidence they both evolved from Morse code. It's evidence the same guys are designing it. So if there are similar genes in different animals, I think that's an example of the same designer wrote the code. A single flea is more complex than the entire city of Manchester, England, where you live. All the infrastructure, the water structure, the electrical structure, the sewer system, the street system, everything. None of that pales in comparison to a flea in a complexity of a single cell is more complex than the whole country of England. And yet you want me to believe that because there are ERVs that look like they have similar things, or there's a genetic code that looks similar, therefore this is indication of evolution? No, this is indication of an amazingly smart designer, and he ought to get the glory for his creation. The reason clams are found at the bottom of the geologic column is clams are already at the bottom when the flood starts. That's where they live. I think the animals are sorted in the so-called geologic column based upon habitat. The birds are found on top because birds die last in a flood. They're sorted based upon mobility. Clams can't run very fast. They're sorted based upon intelligence. Clams aren't too bright. They're sorted based on body density. A clam, pound for pound, or grams per cubic centimeter, is more dense than a bird, grams per cubic centimeter. So I think the sorting, you can look up the body density of reptiles. It is different than the body density of mammals. That would automatically sort them into similar layers just because of their body density. Once they die, they're going to be sorted by density. Not a single one could it be proven that had children that lived that were different. Why would you think a fossil in the dirt could do something that no animal today can do? Every animal today produces children that are just like itself, the same, obviously same kind. But yet you think bones in the dirt could do something that animals today can't do. I don't understand why you have such faith in such a dumb theory like that.
Well, I'm not going to be dragged into the straw man argument that you always use, you know, because everybody knows that evolution, and you've done over 200 debates, you know that evolution doesn't say that, you know, something's going to produce like an elephant is going to give birth to a pine tree. You know that. So the fact that you're using that argument to me says that you're getting a little bit desperate. We can map them against the fossil records and we see that they match perfectly. These 1 in a 50 million chances. And as we start to climb up that tree, we can see the point where a new insertion is made. And that 1 in a 50 million place insertion is then passed on to all the offspring after that. And then if the new insertion is made, that 1 in a 50 million chance insertion is passed on to the offspring after that. It seems to me that you're kind of hand wave dismissing the significance of it being a 1 in a 50 million chance place. And you're just saying, oh, it's just made up of A, T, C, and G. Microsoft use zeros and ones.
I agree that, but see, this is a change in the code. This is like finding a typographical error in a book that is then repeated for every generation after that. The layers are not different ages. All the animals lived at the same time. They died at the same time and probably got sorted by hydrologic sorting. So I think you have a real prejudice against anybody speaks out against the geologic column or against evolution. Their stuff doesn't get published. So you can't claim majority opinion or it's in a publisher. I won't buy that for a second. Common sense tells me when I see lava tested from a volcano and it gives the wrong age, why won't they publish that?
The counter arguments to the radiological dating topic that Catz brought up, all your examples are a lava event, Kent?
That's generally what potassium argon dating is used on.
But I can understand your argument if you tell me what your understanding is. So please, can you tell us all what your understanding of allele frequency is?
No, I'd rather wait for the separate debate. Let's do that in one.
This is the debate on evolution.
The title of the debate was, what is the evidence for evolution?
Ken, this is a debate on evolution, and I'm sorry for speaking over you, but this is really important. This is a debate, and I do apologize for speaking over you, and I promise I will answer any question you want after this point. And I really do genuinely apologize for speaking over you, but I hope you realize it's a critical, important point. Okay? Because we couldn't talk about isochron dating because you didn't understand it, so we moved on. We couldn't talk about ERVs because you said you don't know what they are, and we had to move on. But the very basic concept of allele frequency, we must surely know that you understand what that is, or at least I know what your understanding of that is, so we can move on in the conversation. No, I will go back to ERVs, but we can't talk about that because you've said you don't know anything about it. I would go back.
But you keep talking about it. Shut up.
I've given you the Greenwich warbler, that again, they would not interbreed. So by your definition, I've answered the question. By your definition, they are animals that will no longer bring forth, therefore they are different kind.
Your story about the warbler is still a warbler. Your story about Drosophila, the guy raising a bunch of flies in the laboratory in 35 generations, he got 2 flies that won't breed with each other. They're still a fly.
The fact is, with the Human Genome Project, we have fully mapped the human genome. So it's big, but we know where all the genes are. We know where everything is. But I'll pick you up on something else. You've made the assumption. I said to you, my beliefs at the beginning of this are irrelevant. But you've just jumped to the assumption, because I'm arguing against your standpoint, that I must be an atheist. All right?
Yeah, you're right. I am assuming that you don't want the Bible to be true and you don't want the creation story to be true because it might affect your lifestyle. That's just my assumption. Science means knowledge. All the knowledge of all the farmers in the history of the world tells us cows produce cows. Has science now revealed that cows and mosquitoes are related? Where did science prove that? We're not allowed to talk about variations beyond the little bitty variation like a warbler. We're not allowed to talk about that because that's macroevolution. It doesn't happen. I think you have a religious belief. You have very strongly held this religious belief. Lots of people have strongly held religious beliefs, but that's all you have is a religion when you believe warblers and flies and bananas and cactus are related. I feel sorry for you for believing such a thing, but I'll think there are things I don't understand about God's amazing creation. I think that's normal. Nobody knows what gravity is, okay? And nobody knows what light is. We know what it does and can measure the speed, but we don't know what it is. But I choose to stand in awe of the designer and say, wow, God, this DNA code you made is amazing. I can praise God for the creation he made. And the doubts I have, or the questions I don't have answered yet, I'm going to say, Lord, I don't understand, but I trust you.